Hi, hi there, everyone. Welcome and thank you so much for joining us today for our accessibility in publishing event. Um, we'd love to hear from you in terms of where you're joining in from. Just a reminder that you will not have access to your camera or mic during the presentation. And if you are attending festival events and excited about the books that you've heard people read from or want to find samples of books from publishers that are at our event. Iron Dog Books is our official publisher or bookseller for the event. And without you, this free festival could not happen. So if you haven't already, please consider making a donation to the festival. We'll have time for some questions at the end, and we'll ask you to include them in the chat. My name is Allison Tedford Seaweed. I am the Director of Marketing for Word Vancouver. I'm also an author myself and a writer and a consultant. I'm a member of Kwakiutl First Nation, though my ancestry is Nakwada, and I am coming at you today from the traditional unceded territories of the Semath and Matsqui First Nations people, and I'm grateful to be able to work in this beautiful space and among such incredible people. So thank you so much for joining us today. And I am delighted to be joined for Accessibility in Publishing by Angela Dahl of Legible. Angela is a co-founder and chief publishing operations officer at Legible Media, and as such oversees all aspects of publishing and operations for this dynamic, fast-growing, values-based startup. Legible.com is proud to offer a beautiful browser-based, completely reflowable, responsive, and accessible digital reading experience. Angela joined the team at Brightwing Books in Vancouver, BC in 2017, and then partnered with its founder, Kelly Kainsworth, to expand the mission of the company by forming Brightwing Media in 2018. Brightwing is a full-service digital media company that aims to assist authors and publishers in bringing beauty and accessibility to the digital land space. Angela is also the managing editor of St. Catherine Review and a published author, poet, and essayist whose work has appeared most recently in Thin Air Magazine, Type House Literary Review, Relief Journal, Rock and Sling, Ruminate Magazine, Elephant Journal, and Art House America. Her published books include her memoir, Nearly Orthodox, on being a modern woman in an ancient tradition, and Garden in the East, The Spiritual Life of the Body, through Ancient Faith Publishing. Her latest book is The Wilderness Journal, 365 Days with the Philokalia. I hope I have that correct.
Very good.
She currently lives in Vancouver, BC. So welcome, Angela. And we're also joined by Meagan Dyer, who is a production editor at UBC Press. She's a member of the Press's Accessibility Committee, the Association of University Presses Digital Publishing Committee, and shares responsibility for overseeing the production and accessibility quality assurance of new ebooks. She holds an honors BA in creative writing and journalism from the Vancouver Island University. Meagan lives in Vancouver with her wife and American Bulldog Gaston. So thank you both for joining and for sharing your wisdom and knowledge and experience in this space. Accessibility is something that's really important to me personally as a woman with a disability and as somebody who advocates for diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging in the workplace, and creating pathways for inclusion in industries where people may not have been included in the past or may struggle on an ongoing basis to be included. So books are something I'm really passionate about as being part of Word. And I thought it would be really great for us to have a conversation about this really important issue. So thank you both.
Thanks for having us.
So our first question today is, why is working in accessibility and publishing important to you? If you want to start, Angela.
Sure. It's interesting. I didn't know you were going to read the whole bio. It's so long. I apologize for it being so long. There's just so much to this story. And I think I got interested in accessibility when I started working with Brightwing and started making ebooks, um, and realized how few, what the percentage of books that are not fully accessible is kind of a staggering number of ebooks. And part of the reason we started Legible is because we would start making these beautiful, accessible books, and a lot of the existing platforms were not able to read the work we were doing, even though it was all legit, all within the EPUB format. But it was frustrating because what we really wanted to do was open ebooks, open books and readings to everybody. And so I think it became one of our pillars at Legible that we wanted to make that an aim of ours to be the most accessible place for somebody to come to read books. But the real work that we're seeing that needs to be done is on the catalogs themselves, because we can't do anything with the publisher's work. Obviously, we can only present it. So I guess that's when we decided we were going to try to really evangelize to the publishing industry about the importance of making books that everybody can read, regardless of anything that might normally stand in their way. So I think that's why I'm so passionate, because to me it just seems like, why wouldn't you want everybody to be able to read your book?
Absolutely. I think that's what most authors want is to be able to reach more people.
Yeah.
And, um, for me, like growing up and spending lots of time in libraries and having that level of like financial access to like all of the
Hmm.
books in the entire world is, something that really like inspired me. So being able to expand that to people with different levels of ability is really important too. How about you, Megan?
Well, I have to say I echo most of what Angela said there. I think most people in publishing, won't speak for everyone, but most people in publishing are here from a place of passion. And again, when I got into this industry and learned more about accessibility, and ebooks is my specialty, but in every possible way. I, the thought of excluding people from the content that so many people, authors, editors, publishers, put so much work into and passion into, and knowing that there's a hunger for that content out there, knowing that we're putting these books into the world that people can't access, it was honestly a little bit disturbing to me. So that's when I really took interest in learning more about accessibility. And also from a personal standpoint, I had a temporary injury a number of years back. I had a shoulder injury and a concussion from a hockey mishap. And I was taking a course at the time and dipping my toes into read aloud software and just learning firsthand how awful, how awful those early ebooks were in those terms. I knew that's something that I wanted to do one day. So I've really been pleased over the past 10 years that I've had the opportunity to work on accessible ebooks and try to just make them better for everybody who needs that content.
That is so great. Yes, our executive director has written extensively about her experiences with concussion and head injuries. So it's definitely something that we are really cognizant of, and it's really great to hear your story and experiences around this. The next question I have is, what misconceptions do people typically have about publishing and accessibility? If you want to start with that one, Megan.
Sure. That's a really great question, because I think I had a lot of these misconceptions until not too long ago myself. One of them, the big one, I think, is that perceiving what are difficulties and challenges as barriers to making accessible content. They're really not that hard of a barrier when you put a little bit of more effort into it. So one barrier that I had in kind of a production role is thinking that I had to make a perfect accessible EPUB for a whole list of books or whole catalog of books all at once, when really just starting somewhere, doing a little bit of research into what content is wanted and needed the most, what accessibility features are wanted and needed the most, and at least starting somewhere and then growing from there. But this notion that publishers and as individuals, we don't have the resources, monetary or human resources, to even get started. I think that's a major misconception. Once you get going, you can really build off it and at least get a start.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right, Megan. And I think that, I mean, that it's funny because I still get publishers who will say, well, we just don't have time to do that. And I think that the biggest misconception that I've run across is that people don't want it. That there isn't a market for it, but the market is huge. The number of people who are interested in accessible material, I mean, it's growing all the time. And I think one of the misconceptions is that it's just people who are visually impaired. And it certainly isn't. We're talking about people who may have motor issues, who can't scroll or can't use a mouse or something like that they need to be able to tab through, or someone who may have a cognitive disability that keeps them from being able to use traditional ways of reading the material. So it's when we talk about making something accessible, it's not just the ability of text to speech. And I think that's what people think about first. So the fact that, that there isn't this huge market of people who are looking for this material is kind of a crazy idea, because it isn't just the people who have those challenges to reading. It's also the people who love them. So the people, like, if you are the parent of a child, that parent needs that information and needs the ability to have that book available for their kid, or if you're the caretaker for someone. So it's actually a pretty large number of people. And I don't know, Megan, if your number matches mine, but I think last time I read, as far as digital materials go, ebooks, I think I was reading somewhere that was somewhere between 80 and 90% of ebooks are inaccessible. It was a large number of ebooks.
Mm-hmm.
So if you can imagine being a person who wants to read, who has one of these barriers, you've got access to 10 to 20% of the material available to the world. And that's an astoundingly large number. So I think, the misconception that there aren't enough people to make it, worth it, is kind of it just, nobody's buying that anymore. Just digital has opened access to so many people, and now we actually need to give the people who have that access something, some equal standing on the materials that they have to choose from.
Yeah, I think those are the numbers that I have as well. And making accessible content is obviously the right thing to do, and we ought to be doing it. But also, I don't mean to have a bad take here, but there's a market for it, and publishers are constantly talking about needing to reach new markets. Yep. Here it is, right in front of us. Why not?
I had somebody who's an accessibility expert that I like a whole lot, and we were kind of talking about it at Legible. We're like, well, we don't want to talk about it like as, there's a market. And she said, why not? Why not? These are people who have money. They are consumers. They are readers. There's no reason to not think about every single person who might want to read that book. So
exactly.
it feels gross to go, oh, it's a market, but it's like, yes, these are people who want to buy things. So that's what a market is.
Yes.
Absolutely. I mean, I hear that often. And when I think about brands that don't consider aspects of their audience, like as an Indigenous woman, like people don't seem to consider, like we buy things, we have money also, we need things. And so, yeah, it's I think it's perfectly valid. And I mean, in publishing, we need to establish business cases for things in order to be able to steward the resources that we have, and to be able to bring works to as many people as possible. So it's perfectly valid. The other thing that I wanted to mention that I didn't mention at the beginning is that we have Dana from Caption Star joining us today, who is captioning this event, because we couldn't have an event about accessibility in publishing and not have it accessible. So I'm very grateful that Dana was able to join us and to provide this service. So thank you, Dana. And in terms of additional questions, and for me, I guess when I first started working in and around publishing, I was aware of like Braille books and large print books, right? And I really didn't have an awareness of the digital side of things. So I've definitely learned a lot about that over the last while in terms of understanding like the very broad range of people that publishing is now equipped to serve and support, and all of the different formats that are available. So it's been really, really interesting and fascinating to be able to consider that. And of course, audiobooks as well. So the next question is, what advancements in accessibility are you most proud of in the context of your publishing house? If you want to take that one first, Angela.
Sure. Let me see. I think, when we first started talking about accessibility, even at Brightwing, it did feel like a black box. I think and this kind of harkens back to your earlier question about misconceptions. I think there's always been this sort of, this is a hard thing to do kind of mentality in the publishing industry and in the digital publishing industry as well. And I think just learning, just honestly, just getting a really strong awareness of what's necessary and what's possible um, has been huge for us, especially at Brightwing. Um, and actually at Legible, we started a wing that we call our Legible Publishing Services. So we actually do create ebooks as well for all platforms that are accessible, and we do remediation. Because what we started to see was we have a lot of publishers coming in the door. It's great work, but how much of it meets those accessibility criteria? And we started seeing really firsthand how low the number was. So I think one of the things I'm really excited about is that at Legible, we are looking to create an accessibility bookstore. So you'd be able to really see kind of at a glance which of the books actually meet those criteria and to what level, so that anybody who's doing a search for a book that may have an impairment that they need to kind of keep in mind, they can actually filter those books and be able to see that. So it's in the pipeline, and it's actually a pretty big priority for us. So we are excited about that. And I think that I think we're partnering with an organization called Benetech, and we are getting our publishing services actually certified through Benetech. So we'll be a certified accessibility provider vendor for ebooks, and we are talking with them about what it might look like to actually have Legible certified as an accessible platform as well. They don't yet have that available, but we'd love to be part of the solution. This is what we keep telling ourselves. We're like, we know what the problems are. We just want to be part of the solution. We don't have to be the only solution. We hope we're not the only solution, because that would actually just be continuing the problem. We'd like to kind of lead the charge on making a platform that anybody who comes to can read the book. So I'm really proud of that. That's part of our mandate, and it's one of the pillars of our organization. So yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And Megan, I'd love to hear from you about all of the things that UBC Press is up to.
Sure. First, that's just great to hear about that platform, Angela. It's sometimes I think the accessibility community, it is a community, but also working in silos at the same time. So it's wonderful to hear that there's just more great things happening. So, as for UBC Press, I guess the biggest thing we've done recently is we passed our Benetech certification as a publisher. So that process meant we supplied Benetech, this third-party organization, which basically sets about the highest possible standards for accessibility in the ebook, and I think other areas, but for us, ebook services area. So we supplied them with some of our existing ebooks. They told us what was wrong, and we had a kind of a substantial back and forth on making those changes. So now we're basically our ebook production process is certified. But I think that was a lot of work, of course, but I think the part that I'm most proud of is, UBC Press having this commitment, this long-term commitment, because once you're certified, it gets renewed on an annual basis. So we need to maintain those standards. And every quarter we receive new standards or updates or upgrades that need to be made. So I'm just really proud of the production team and our accessibility committee, our director, everyone involved in making that commitment. You know, doing the legwork is one thing, but having that financial and kind of upper level support is really important for us to be able to do that work. So I'm really thrilled that I'm with a press that's making that commitment. And our accessibility committee is working on other initiatives as well, where what have we done? We're dipping our toes into the audiobook realm and trying to make them as accessible as possible. We're producing some of our books in Braille. I don't quite have the background knowledge on all the little bits and pieces of that, but I think just the commitment factor is what I've been happiest with.
That's really amazing. It sounds like a lot of really great work is happening. So what partners have you worked with in doing this work? You've mentioned Benetech, but Meagan, are there other groups that you have worked with in terms of creating the most accessible products available?
Yes, and that's probably been, over the past 10 years, it's just been a growing knowledge. None of this has happened overnight. So the NNELS, the National Network for Equitable Library Services, has been just in terms of resources and advocating for funding. I'm sure, UBC Press and previous workplaces wouldn't have gone terribly involved or at the same extent if that funding wasn't advocated for. So they've been absolutely instrumental. Accessible Publishing, another group, folks at eBound, they're a Canadian ebook distribution and resource company organization, and just individuals as well, going to conferences and learning everything from how to distribute these books to how to correct a little tiny bit of code. Sorry if you can hear my dog coming in from his walk. Just so many different people have helped on the way. So it's I'm really pleased that there's so many organizations where you can learn and grow and share. Yeah.
That's awesome. It sounds like a really great group of partners. How about you, Angela? Who have you been working with?
I hate to just say same, but for the most part, actually, you've pretty much named everybody that along the way. Like these are people who are they're sort of they're stalwarts in the community. Like they're just foundational to all the work that's been done. And most of the people that you mentioned as well, Meagan, have been doing this, as you said, for years. It's been years in the making. And in some ways, I think that they've been shouting from the rafters for so long, they've gotten a bit hoarse. And I don't know, this is like everything I think of reminds me of like media. So sorry about this, but if you ever watch Modern Family, there's this whole episode where Claire and her husband are having this argument, and it's because she always tells him about these great things and he doesn't remember that she's the one who said it. And so he finally gets to the point where he's like, oh my gosh, I tried this salad. You wouldn't believe it. You have to try it. But she's like, they show clips about how she's been talking about this wedge salad for like, like, I don't know, like 6 months. And finally he's like, you should try this wedge salad. It's so great. And in some ways, it's the first thing I think of when I think about all the people like Nels and, and even Benetech and the number of accessible people in the community that they've been talking about this and building like a wealth of knowledge for so long. And now all of a sudden we're all like, oh, hey, wouldn't it be cool if everybody could read the books that are out there? That would be so cool. And I think in some ways, a lot of, what I'm seeing, at least on the platform side of things, is the legislation in the EU that passed in 2019 has to be enacted by 2025, that everything online has to be accessible or they will have to pay penalties. I think that's starting to drive more and more people to take it really seriously. I'm sorry to say that's what has been driving things forward on the digital side, but I'm also really happy that there is this deadline that's looming. I think Canada is going to be next with that sort of thing, and I think the US hopefully will follow suit as well. But, you know, you take these big publishers like Penguin, who I just was talking with at the W3C conference this week. um, they've got to remediate a lot of books, and they're taking it really seriously, which is it's just it's awesome. It's amazing to know that it's been on the radar for it's been on the radar for a long time, but it's really on their radar now because nobody really knows what happens if you've got 50,000 ebooks and only 5,000 of them are accessible. Do you have to pull them off the platform? Are you going to get, you know, fined for every book? Or nobody really knows how it's going to work, but they're taking it seriously and they're trying to make sure that they hit the criteria. Um, and I would say that would be another partner as well that we've worked with, and that is we've been instrumental with the W3C for a number of years, through Right Wing and now through Legible, to be at the forefront of how those standards are enacted, how they're decided upon, how they're articulated. It's extremely helpful. It's really nerdy. So if you're kind of a major nerd, W3C is a great place to join to be a part of that conversation. Um, they're also the people who see where the barriers are really, really upfront and personal. And you also have a lot of people at the W3C who are working on these standards and these articulations of the standards, who have lived experience in the needs that are necessary. So to me, that's incredibly valuable.
Yeah, absolutely. It can be challenging when, solutions are enacted and without necessarily considering the lived experiences of people that you're trying to support. So having that involvement is really key. So it sounds like everybody's working with amazing people on this challenge. And that kind of leads into the next question around how do you consult with end users to get feedback on your products, and to keep developing things that are going to meet the needs better. So if you want to start with that, Angela.
Yeah, we're pretty new on the on the scene right now at Legible. We've really only been kind of out of beta for a short time, so we're still building up our communication with our readers. We try to make ourselves as approachable as we can to hear from people. But one of the things that we like to do is we like to solicit feedback from the people who are reading our books. Um, and what we really want to do is have a two-way communication with all of our readers. So we're still really very much working on that. We are working on what that dialogue can look like, and we are also committed to testing our product with people again who have these lived experiences, who can tell us exactly where the issues are. It reminded me that one of the first workshops I went to when I started to do more accessibility stuff was it started with there were two tests that the workshop host talked with us about and showed us. And the first is, and this is someone who has a visual impairment, he said, I just want you to see what it's like for me to use a website that's not accessible. So he muted everybody and he just shared his screen and he tried to book a train ticket on this inaccessible website. And I want you to think about what it feels like for you as a digital user to go to a website that doesn't work super well, doesn't load very quickly, or you have some trouble, like as a fully sighted person or fully whatever person, as a person you are, things that make you frustrated. If you can imagine taking that times 1,000, this is someone who's just trying to book a ticket to somewhere, uh, tabbing through, things aren't showing up. So stuff that might, for me as a sighted person or as an able-bodied person in whatever respect that is, that I might think, hey, this is great, this is pretty close. Like, how hard could it be? We have no way really of understanding fully where the limitations are, which is why the standards are so important because they take into mind everybody who may have an issue. Um, which is why the standards are so daunting for a publisher or even for an author who may be trying to make their work accessible. But it is a circular thing, is that we're trying to make sure that we are inclusive of everybody who may come to want to read your book. And as I think, Megan, you said earlier, it's like we can't let that be the thing that stops us from trying anything. We have to at least make an attempt to try to get as close as we can. So I think that's kind of where where we are right now is we're trying to make our incremental changes. We're trying to make sure that we delight our readers as often as we can, and where we don't delight the readers, we listen to them. So there's a whole program we're talking about, which is Legible is Listening, um, where we're asking our readers, what are we missing? How can we be better for you? Because, you know, at the end of the day, that's why we exist. We exist for the people who come to read our books. So, yeah.
That's awesome. It sounds like you're on the right track and heading in the right direction. How about you, Megan? How is UBC Press engaging readers around the accessible products that you're producing?
Yeah, well, it's I think that's a next big step that we need to do more with. And part of that is learning how best to reach these audiences in a way that we're not just sorry, not sure how to articulate this. You know, use people or just kind of expect feedback for, you know, people who don't want to provide feedback for whatever reason. So I think, you know, right now we're relying on some of these community partners that I mentioned. Benetech works with people with these lived experiences, readers with lived experiences with print disabilities. So we are hoping that that information does trickle down through the certification requirements. Same with our partnerships with NELS. You know, they have people with print disabilities on staff. So it's not a great answer and it's not the best answer. We certainly want to be doing more. One thing I'd like to see in the future, right now we have a consultant working with us to make sure that we maintain our certification requirements. But at some point I'd like to either have another person on contract, or maybe when we're comfortable with our certification standards, maybe, you know, replace that person with someone with a lived experience or more lived experience. Maybe both types of consultants would be best. I'm not sure, but yeah, I think in the short term, I don't have a great answer. We are relying on our partners more to hear this feedback. That's something I'd like to certainly see more of, though.
It actually makes me ask this question as well. When we start thinking about accessibility, like we think about accessibility for readers, but I also think about, like, you know, what it looks like for us to make space and to have or hold space really for more people who uh, in publishing, who want to work in publishing, authors, publishers, programmers, developers, typesetters, designers, you know, people who have live experience. You know, I wonder how accessible, or how more probably the word is more inclusive. I wonder how we can make the publishing industry a little bit more inclusive to try to find candidates and entice people into publishing. I mean, it's hard to get into publishing anyway for
Yeah.
anybody, but it's also not the most lucrative stuff sometimes. But you know, like, how can we make this an industry that is welcoming and is actively trying to seek out people who can help improve from the inside out, you know, so that we're not just thinking about our readers. It's always great to think about our readers, but you know, I think about this a lot at Legible whenever we've done any kind of hiring is, you know, where do we look? How do we find the people who are going to be great assets to our team and bring this wealth of knowledge that, you know, maybe we can't get from any other kind of candidates anywhere? Um, you know, whether it's somebody who's you know, outside of publishing that hasn't really considered it, or whether it's somebody who just doesn't have access to the normal channels of hiring, somebody who really can't navigate Indeed.com or Glassdoor. So I think that one of the things that would be really helpful for the publishing industry in general would be for us to kind of throw our nets a bit wider, um, open up our arms a bit wider, and try to really encourage, um, I don't know, opportunity for people.
Yeah, that's really, if I may speak for a couple seconds more, it's really fascinating. There's a publisher I just heard, a university publisher in the United States, that put together a program that I'd sort of been kind of percolating in the back of my mind for a while. It's sort of a publisher boot camp for people who are already in academia, so that's already a bit of a barrier, but at least you're bringing, as you say, opening that net to people who are, otherwise very intelligent in other areas and just need to get publishing on their radar. And I wish there would be a little bit more of that in Canada. And that might be something I might mention to my bosses to try and consider, or UBC at large. I think that's a really important aspect.
Yeah, I mean, and just thinking about like if that large proportion of books are inaccessible, like why would you want to work somewhere that makes products you can't use?
Exactly.
Right? Like, no, thank you.
Exactly.
Like I can't even enjoy the product. I can't, and like if I'm someone who loves the written word, but I can't use anything that's being made, like why would I want to be there? I wouldn't be able to connect over it. Right. So I think that's another piece. And thinking about my experience, like I have a connective tissue disorder, so my joints dislocate. And I remember when I was diagnosed by the rheumatologist, and he was like, well, you need to not type. And I was like, well, the thing is, I'm a writer. And he's like, oh, I'm like, oh no, how am I going to do this? So I dictate a lot of my content. I remember when I was handing in the first draft of my first 2 chapters of my first book, and I came across this checklist of things to cross-reference before you hand in your manuscript. And the first thing on the checklist was, do not dictate your book. I was like, well, and I mean, I think the intent was like, don't give your editors a transcript of your ramblings, like, please, like, sense, right? But like I, as somebody who takes transcripts and turns them into actually, usable text, I was initially like, will they be able to tell? Because I couldn't type all that. I can tell you that my joints would fall apart. Like I could do that, but someone would have to be responsible for putting me back together again. So yeah, so that's another piece in terms of like there are barriers authors face even getting their books to market. So it's nice to think about like, in finding ways to overcome that, to be able to bring a book to print that it will actually still get to be enjoyed by other people who also face barriers. And I mean, my first book was about chronic pain and entrepreneurship. So the target market was specifically, people with disabilities. So, and that's why I insisted that it was going to be an audiobook format. Either the publisher could do it or I would do it, but it was going to be an audio format. And my publisher was really great about making that happen. And they've been so supportive about accessible formatting. So it's been good in that way. But yeah, definitely thinking about that from the perspective of a person with a disability. Like I wouldn't want to work in an industry that doesn't serve me well. Right? Like
Exactly. It's interesting you talk about audiobooks too, because I think when I was growing back in my day, when I think about like they were books on tape then, that's how old I am. People weren't thinking about audiobooks as something everybody could have or wanted to have. And audiobooks have always been an accessibility product for people who don't have the visual abilities to read sort of traditionally published books. And I just think that the advances in technology, text to speech, and really kind of the huge audiobook market, more and more people are turning to audiobooks because they don't have the time or the energy or the ability to grab a book or whatever it is. It's another access point, I think, that's been huge for the accessibility community. I mean, for the market in general, but it does, there's always that like once a year, there's like an article like, are audiobooks really reading? Is an audiobook the same as reading a book? And it's like, well, no, but yes, but no, but yes. And I think that we're getting over this hump where we think that somehow it's a lesser product, or it's less impactful or interesting. And I think ebooks has had to kind of climb that mountain as well. That digital reading, of course, it's a different thing. It's a different media. It's a different way of understanding material. And I think what I love about where we are right now in technology and where we are in literature is that people have a lot of choices now. And I think that's really important because more choices means there's more opportunity. More opportunity means there are more readers. Hopefully we could make all of these things more accessible, because I think sometimes people go, oh, well, it's an audiobook, so it's automatically accessible. Well, not necessarily. A lot depends on the platform you're on and how the book is structured. And, um, if there's music in the background, that can be distracting for some people. Maybe they can't hear what's going on. So yeah, there's still a lot of work to be done. But I do think giving readers more choice definitely has been a huge boon to the publishing industry.
Absolutely. And even like, I didn't think I would ever like find audiobook to be like an accessible format for my needs, but as someone with ADHD, I prefer to listen to something at 1.5 or 1.75 speed, because any slower than that is like being stuck in Sunday traffic. Right? It's not an enjoyable experience. Very, very slow, and it's hard to hang on to because it's moving so slowly. So definitely there's lots of different, it's not just like the fact that it's like you can hear it, but also that you in some cases can adjust the speed to your
Yeah,
processing, which can
yeah,
be like such a blessing because there's
yeah.
so much
My
to enjoy otherwise.
my eldest discovered early in their life that captioning, like and now it's kind of a thing now, like everybody likes captions, but they discovered, I don't know, like probably 7 or 8 years old, they would turn on captions for everything they watched. And it got to the point where they couldn't watch things without the captions. And later, when they were diagnosed with ADHD, the doctor was saying this is really common for somebody with ADHD to have to, if you give them some options, the ability to increase the speed of the audiobook is a huge thing. Adding captioning, subtitles. Yeah, it is. It's just, again, like sometimes you don't know until you stumble across that preference, and then all of a sudden you're like, okay, now I understand how I can access this material and take it in. And I think one of the things I love about people, readers especially, being able to change those preferences and play around with it a little bit to find sort of the secret sauce to what's going to open that book to them, is that they stop thinking that there's something wrong with them. And that's why they can't figure out that material. Because I think that there are a lot of people who may not have that sort of strict, I have a visual impairment, so I can't read this book, but who may have other things going on in their lives that, like they just think it's that there's something wrong with them instead of thinking there's something wrong with the way the material is being presented to them. So yeah, it's exciting, and I just love encouraging people to like just try this or try that. Just keep working on it.
Yeah,
Mhm.
absolutely. It's yeah, it's coming to that space of like when there's lots of options, it feels less like, is there something wrong with me? It's like, no, the lack of accessibility is the barrier,
Yep.
right? Like how I am is how I am, and I just need the books to be available. And right, so I think that's definitely an important perspective to consider, especially given like disability is something that can start at any time and can be very variable in how it shows up, and so having that flexibility can be
Yeah.
really crucial to be able to access things,
Mhm.
depending on how things are going. So our next question is, what projects do you have coming in the next few years that you're looking forward to for expanding accessibility? If you want to take this one first, Megan.
Sure. Um, well, we're hoping to remediate more of our backlist titles just as a starting point. And then from there, I think we really want to focus on the metadata and discoverability side, which is a bit of a kind of chicken and egg thing. We're at the point now we are producing the metadata, which basically would tell the world what accessibility features our ebooks offer, how to access them. And it'll be great when we can get that out there. The problem is there are certain websites and ebook distributors and platforms that don't take in that metadata. So I think it's going to be a challenge of continuing to do that work and try and make our books accessible, or sorry, discoverable, and try to push the community at large. And there's also a problem with some devices, e-reading devices, that don't offer certain features that our books contain. So
Mm.
I think, now that we've reached this level of accessibility that we're happy with for the moment and proud of, just trying to push the ebook industry as a whole to keep moving at that same pace. And so that's just going to continue work with our partners, you know, events, festivals, conferences like this, just trying to get the word out there more. I think it also comes down to connecting with readers and customers and parents and libraries more too. And, as we've just been discussing, making it known that there are these options and there is a demand, and we need to let people know that that demand is there. So maybe that's less of an individual project at the press, but I think an important one that we really need to try to be a leader in more. So that's something I'm trying to focus on. That and yeah, I guess again, the device compatibility issue, it's not just an accessibility thing, but one challenge we're working on right now is getting certain e-readers to accept Indigenous accents and diacritics. We're putting a lot of work into making our books authentic in the languages that we're publishing in. And when they come out in just, Latin, anglicized alphabets, that's really problematic. So all of these things we're just trying to kind of push for and develop that community a little bit better to raise the standards as a whole.
Yeah, that's certainly an issue, just even within public life, within British Columbia, being able to get your driver's license or your identification to include. So it's definitely an important consideration. And something I encountered too, just within my own business, I had some work done around my branding, and like we selected fonts and colors and things. But then when I went to start using my language in the font, it didn't work. So I have like a different font that I use for my language because the characters and the accents and things can be displayed. So that was a learning lesson that I.
Yeah, it is. And we actually have had that experience as well, because we've done a few books that we've had that issue with. We actually did a book for the Sinaiaks tribe called Not Extinct, and we did it as what we call a living book. That of course it doesn't work as well on any other platform other than ours, but we're working on we had to make a version of it that can be obviously read everywhere, but it's a huge barrier when you have to sacrifice design choices because of a limitation of the platform. That's one of the things we're excited about, is because we're based in the browser, we're not based in a device. Like if you have a device, you can just go to your browser and your device and go to legible.com and read. But because we're not tied into an app or tied to a certain device, we can use all of the HTML and all of the CSS available to you, like you would a website. So we created this book for Ma Press called Not Extinct, and we were able to put in like a pronunciation guide so that somebody could click on a word and hear how it was pronounced, and the word would actually the font renders correctly, because we have the ability to read any font you can read on the internet. And then showing video interviews with different elders of the tribe and hearing them, like their audio stories, because the tradition is a very strongly oral one. So it's great to be able to like read the story, but it's also amazing to be able to hear it as well, a little audio clip here and there. But yeah, we have had that trouble as well. We did a series of books for oh gosh, I guess Royal BC Museum, where they were reprinting some historical books that were Indigenous related, and so we had to go through a series of hoops to get some of the other platforms to be able to read those characters, which is kind of just a wild thing, but it is what it is. But we're hoping at Legible, like this is kind of a big hope, but we're hoping that if we're doing it and we're doing it well and we do it right, that everybody else is going to have to follow suit, because it's the right thing to do. So that's what we're hoping for, but we'd love to be leading the way in that. Um, and just like, a personal thing on my part is, you know, I think if we can help influence book designers and authors and publishers um, to design with digital and accessibility in mind instead of as an afterthought, that would be huge. I had a conversation with a guy from Adobe. We were talking about InDesign, and he said, "Well, how can we help? How can we help make it more, suit you guys' needs? Because we do a lot of our work starting from INDD files, and at the on the publishing side." I said, if you could do any kind of education for designers, layout designers, that would be huge. If you, as you're the tool that most of these print designers are using, and if you can help change this thinking from print first to like a more universal way of looking at that book, because what happens is, and rightly so, publishers and authors get very excited and attached to a layout, a print layout specifically. And then the book comes to us after it's already maybe even gone to the printer. And then as like our specialty at Brightwing and Legible is doing complex books. So we do a lot with images and tables and MathML and different languages and things like that. But these books come to us, and the authors and the publishers already really love the way it looks on print, but it doesn't read well on digital. It's not laid out for digital. So we always have to kind of orient our clients to say, we're going to have to make some subtle changes to the design. So we don't just end up doing a one-to-one transfer. It's not like just creating a PDF of the book, which is not as accessible as many other, as reflowable, obviously. So I think education, like one of the things we'd love to do is be able to kind of go to the go to the source of the stream and say, listen, when you're laying out your book, be thinking about digital, because there are a lot of readers who can't access and will not be able to read the print version. And you want to make sure that what they're reading isn't just sort of an afterthought. You want to give the amount of attention and beauty and money, frankly, toward making a digital product as you do making the print product. So it's not going to be as expensive as the print, but it certainly shouldn't be this afterthought, just run it through a converter and throw it up on a platform kind of idea. It really has to, it'd be great if people gave it some real strong, good, mindful consideration. And the other thing too is alt text. I'm sort of a champion for beautiful alt text. There's absolutely no reason why we can't all do what is it the James Webb Telescope? If you look at the NASA imagery, some of the long form alt text that they do is just, I mean, it's poetry. And there's no reason why we shouldn't approach alt text as being a way to enhance and really support the work in that digital book. It's not just sort of, it's not SEO for the publisher or the author. It's there for the reader. And so how do we make alt text that is just beautiful and informative and does the work that the reader needs in order to really convey it? So it's, it can be a challenge, but I actually think I think it's a cool challenge. It's one that I'm really excited about, seeing what people do with it going forward.
Mhm.
Absolutely. And I think coming from kind of like I used to work a lot in digital publishing, and like web-based publications, where often the like alt text is, tends to be viewed as an SEO feature and less as an accessibility feature.
Right.
So that, making it a beautiful piece, or even really understanding what needs to go in there in order for it to be useful, is definitely an area of growth, I think, just generally in the world outside of books, but also with books too. So yeah, I think that's great. I'm just gonna see if anybody in the audience has any questions. And if not, we will try and slide in our last one. Okay, so I guess our last super quick question before we wrap up is, where do you see future opportunities for expanded accessibility within the industry. And we've talked about, opening pathways for new staff and for looking at, alt text and looking at different formats and expanding. But are there other things, in 1 minute or less that you can think of that you would love to see shift within the industry? And if you want to take that one, Meagan, to start.
Ooh, that's a good question. I bet Angela has some better answers than I do, but I just want it to be a more holistic process, to put it bluntly. Again, we talk about born accessible, but I don't think we really consider it that way. It's at this point, it's more of a word or a term, but I think one thing my work is starting to do a little bit more is think about accessibility before we even bring the author on board. We're started asking or requiring them to submit alt text with their manuscript so that it goes through the copy editing process. More of that, though. I'd like to see that more in the cover design artwork. Is this an accessible image for people to see and appreciate? Are websites that publishers and platforms using, is that accessible? I think it just really needs to be a top to bottom accessible experience. And I think, we're getting the ebook coding there pretty close now, but there's accessing these files there's still a lot of barriers in place. And we need to have more people with print disabilities and lived experiences involved throughout the entire process, as we've already discussed. So I think those two pieces are where I'd like to see it go. Don't have any specific thoughts, but yeah, that's basically it.
Awesome.
Yeah, I would say exactly the same. Just going to ditto that.
you.
I was thinking like the number one thing would be, it would be great if we could have standardization, if we could have, especially with workflows, and obviously we're going to be doing a lot of remediation because we want to get as much as we can of the catalog, the back catalogs, to a place where they're accessible for everybody. Like, that's a lot of work. I know that. But I think it's really, really important work. But if we could also have an agreement and foundational pieces in place, again, for that porn accessible side of things, because yeah, it does, everybody kind of has a little bit of their own interpretation of that, which is why the work of NELS and organizations like Benetech is so hugely helpful. Just so that we can all kind of be on the same page together and row together on this. At the end of the day, it's just going to make things a lot more streamlined. And the expectation that the reader will have, it's going to be a little bit easier to meet the expectations of the readers. So.
Absolutely. No, I love that. Well, I want to thank you both for joining and for sharing your wisdom and insights and experiences. I definitely appreciate the work that you're both doing. When I proposed this panel, I had read about UBC Press and getting the Benetech designation, and I thought back to the conversations that I've had with Legible in the past around the work that you're doing. So definitely, I knew this was the group that I wanted to be able to talk to, and so I'm just so grateful as the person who does marketing at Word, but also who's done work on diversity, equity, and inclusion within the festival. It's something that's really important to me to bring this conversation to the festival. So I really appreciate you having joined us. And again, for anybody listening, if you'd like to purchase books that are appearing in the festival, please check out our bookseller, Iron Dog Books. And I also want to thank the staff and volunteers at Word Vancouver for making this possible. There are so many events happening for writers, for people with interest in representation, in publishing, in literature, that are happening over the next week. So definitely check out everything we have in store. It's free. There are online events. There are some in-person events on Saturday, the 24th for children at the Surrey Library, and on Sunday, the 25th at SFU Harbor Center. So definitely please come join us. sign up for a ticket at Eventbrite or just show up. We will welcome you. We're so excited to have everybody. So thank you so much, everybody. And I hope everybody has a wonderful Sunday.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks.